Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about Mistborn Era 2. This is going to be a general ramble session talking about Era 2 as a whole. We're not going to break down individual books, mostly because I just don't really have the time because we're careening towards Stormlight 5, and I've already done rereads on all of these multiple times. So if you're interested in a more thought out review version, then I will probably put the link in the description if I remember to do that. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started and talk about Era 2 as a whole. But first, please make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And if you want to support the channel in another way, you can of course check out the Patreon, where right now it's still just early access kind of stuff down there and probably some paint sessions and stuff. So yeah, with that being said, let's begin. All right, so Mistborn Era 2. So this time, like as I've said before multiple times, my opinion on Mistborn Era 2 is the quality is nowhere near on the level of Era 1. So that remains true. But on this reread, I was able to really approach the story on its own terms instead of like going in with so many expectations and assumptions and stuff. I was able to really go in on its own terms and like really just appreciate it for the merits of what Brandon did with it. So, if I didn't say it before, but this is going to contain full spoilers because this is a complete total ramble session. So we're just going to kind of talk about it extemporaneously. We're just going to kind of, just ramble about it. Exactly. So, yeah. So Era 1, when you read it on its own terms, it's a lot more enjoyable in my opinion, as opposed to when I went into it expecting a proper direct sequel to Era 1. I mean, it is that exactly, but the quality and the style of the writing is not the same as it was in Era 1. So, like leaving that expectation at the door allowed me to really see what Brandon was doing with this kind of thing, and I really do appreciate it on this time around because it very much gives me that Western pulp kind of fiction kind of feel, very much in line with the stuff that Brandon adds in, like how he has the interludes and stuff about Alamancor Jack and his adventures and stuff. These stories very much come off like that, like it would be in the newspapers, these gentlemen lawmen or whatever going to take care of all these kind of situations and stuff. So when I put it in that context, like when I went through a thing like a few years ago where I just was obsessed with westerns and like went through so many westerns and like did a lot of research on the history of that time period in America and stuff, and a lot of it very much comes off as that. It seems like Brandon definitely did a bit of research and looked into that kind of stuff. So looking at the story from that perspective and coming into it on its own terms, again, like I said, I was very much able to appreciate it a lot more. So the first two books, the story arcs, it's kind of a flat character arc because neither Wax nor Wayne truly has like an in-depth character arc. It really feels like the continuation of the thing that was set up in the very beginning of Alloy of Law. That's the main character journey that Wax goes on. And Wayne, we kind of just discover more about Wayne, but his development doesn't happen to the latter two books. But one of the most interesting things about the first two books, when you read them back to back and like no wait period in between, it really does feel like that should be one book. Alloy of Law and Shadows of Self, I think, should be one book because Shadows of Self essentially is the finalization of the arc that Wax was going on in the first book. Like everything that has to do with Alessi and her death and the way it affects him and stuff. In the first book, in Alloy of Law, that's kind of just pushed off to the side. It's still a part of his character and he still thinks about it a lot, but the effects of it aren't very much felt, like the way in which, the explanation as to how it happened and all that kind of stuff. We don't get really any of that. It remains a mystery and it remains just this character backstory stuff that affects Wax as a person. So when we get into Shadows of Self and find out that Bleeder is actually, Lessie and that kind of stuff, and finding out everything about the Kandra and the fact that Harmony isn't just as absolutely benevolent as we would assume he was actually, making some strategic moves and does some things that some of his servants, the Kandra, don't really appreciate and stuff. So it's really cool to find out that the character that we knew for so long isn't exactly who he was, and the fact, he's a god. It's been 300 years and like that'll change a person obviously, especially with the two different intents pushing on the vessel the way that they do. So I can completely understand that. So the entire way that story culminates in Shadows of Self with the level of depression that Wax feels and the way he gets incredibly angry at Harmony and everything, and just that strategy that Harmony had to use in order to get the one person he basically figured out could actually do this and actually handle this. Like, it makes such a really, really deliciously complicated situation. Like, you understand Harmony's perspective. You understand why he put him through all this, but you definitely understand Wax's perspective. You're like, I'm just a guy, like I'm just a normal person, and like it feels like you picked me out of nowhere to just absolutely torture for years and years and years, and like in ways that I didn't understand or and couldn't see until it all happened and stuff. So like you're just using me as this puppet and stuff. So I completely, totally understand Wax's perspective, and I completely understand what Harmony was doing and why he had to do it. And it's interesting to me though that in the first two books, Harmony has this level of cunning and like clever behavior. Basically, I assume it's because his foresight isn't blocked, and he's actually able to see the outcome of certain decisions and stuff. So it allowed him to make these specific strategic decisions in order to get the outcome that he needed. But when we get to Bands of Mourning and the Lost Metal, he's blinded. So the decisions that he makes are a lot less strategic, and it makes him look a lot less intelligent. He seemed to be very much like he handled this idea of being a god, and he was like on his P's and Q's and stuff in Alloy and Shadows. But then when we get to the last two, he's very much fumbling. Like, part of it is because of the way he's treated Wax, and Wax is like, I don't have anything to do with you. I'm really mad at you. But also, it's like, you're God, dude. Like, come on. Like, there's billions of people on this planet. I'm sure you can have a backup sword, or at least a saber or a shank. Like, somebody can be something else. Like, in the way he had Marcy, like, he only uses Marcy in a way to kind of entice Wax to go back and deal with the situation in Bands, which I didn't really appreciate at all. It makes it feels like Marcy's inclusion as one of his agents, as one of Harmony's agents, is really just a proximity thing. And I feel like the entire idea of them saying like, do you think you're the only agent Harmony has, I feel like Wax really was. So when they were making the point that like, oh no, he has other agents, Marcy Combs and stuff, I feel like that was BS, because in the same way he never really recognized that Wayne was going to be such a majorly influential part of the entire plan, and like a huge catalyst and a perfect, like actual perfect sword for Harmony and stuff. Like I imagine he more or less looked over Marcy in the same kind of way. That's kind of the vibes that I got. Like he was looking at her as a source to make sure he got to Wax. And I don't really appreciate that. It didn't work out that well. So again, like the first two books, I think the first two books should have been one book. I kind of feel like the second two books could have been one book, because specifically because the stuff dealing with the Maoish. So the way in which the Maoish connection to the bands, and the way it connects to the finalization of everything and the Lost Metal, to me that feels like one continuous arc. That should have been a long, in-depth arc, and I really wish that we could have connected the set to what was going on with the Maoish a little better, because the set overall, as in hindsight, it feels like such a non-thing. I mean, it was kind of a secret society that was trying to be a secret society analogous to the Ghost Bloods, but clearly the people that were running it were just not as good and just couldn't keep the organization together, especially with the Trails stuff and the way Trails agents basically just kind of like wiped the table of the set when they killed Wax's uncle and stuff. So it kind of makes sense that it would feel very haphazard and very loosey-goosey, but like as a result, it feels a little too disjointed and feels like an afterthought in the overall story. So I really would have loved for them to be able to connect that better to Trail in like a more solid way. I mean, granted, it is connected because Telson is a member of the set and she is the avatar Trail and that kind of stuff. But like the hanging fruit of the kidnapped people and stuff having just been a part of another plan and then got subsumed into another plan, kind of a thing, that to me just feels very wishy-washy and a little too haphazard. I kind of wish some of that stuff would have been more planned out. Like clearly Brandon was just going to do these as a one-off, and then they kind of became an entire series. But I wish a little more planning was able to be done with it, as far as the villain and stuff, and they could have like made it a lot more epic. Because overall, that's kind of the feeling that I have about the villains of the entire Era 2. Like Miles 100 Lives, I have no connection to that character whatsoever. He's interesting because he's a gold compounder, but apart from that, he's not interesting in the least. the second book. Yeah, Bleeder, she was very interesting only because of who she turned out to be. It turned out to be Leslie. And I think the idea of a Conjura serial killer in the way that she was, I thought that was really, really cool, especially with the use of Trellium and able to give her different allomantic abilities in that way. I thought it was just, and the fact that she's also very, very old. She's older than Harmony and stuff. So I thought all of that together worked out to make a really cool antagonist, but they didn't really use her to the degree that they could have because it felt like as soon as the mystery became aware and Wax and crew like jumped on the case, it was halfway solved by that point, you know? Very much like these kind of pop, Western kind of mystery, crime thriller kind of things. It very much is. As soon as the good guy hears about it, it's basically all wrapped up already. So it's very much that kind of thing. But overall, I think she was a decent villain. She was better than Miles 100 Lives. But then when you get into bands and Lost Metal, like it feels like the antagonist is essentially the Maoish, is essentially the idea of other people trying to make use of this technology. Granted, in Bands of Mourning, it was far more the set that was trying to get access to the bands, but they never truly felt like a threat. The only threat and challenge to getting the bands to me felt like, dealing with the Maoish, not knowing them being a completely unknown entity, and just trying to get there and find them because all the traps and stuff. I really enjoyed that part of that story though because it felt very Indiana Jones and stuff. I was really into that. I would love for these to have been more like archaeological adventure stories, kind of like how that one was. Because that was a lot of fun. I really like the idea of them trying to traverse traps and stuff like that. And then, of course, having a conjurer with them who can just walk through all the traps and just get absolutely obliterated left and right, left and right, left and right. It was so much fun. I really enjoyed that kind of stuff. I wish there would have been a bigger part of the book. And then the mystery reveal, finding out what the actual bands were and not being like two bands or whatever, like that was a really cool twist and stuff. I really enjoyed that kind of stuff. I liked it a lot. And of course, the relationship development of Melan and Wayne was probably my favorite relationship. Granted, I love the development of Wax and Steris. I love how Brandon did that, starting Steris off as this character that most people probably wouldn't be that interested in, thinking she's kind of a boring side character and, just not very action oriented like the other characters, which is obviously the era that we're all, kind of getting into with these characters and stuff. So for her to be this kind of very studious kind of character who's always about planning and danger sense and all this stuff, she just turned out to be a really, really great character. And I love the fact that Brandon subverted his own trope of just putting these two characters together because they just kind of, they're on paper they work. Like putting Wax with Marcy, like I feel like in an earlier version of Brandon, like earlier stories, he 100% would have put them together, regardless of the age difference. He would have definitely put them together. So I love the fact that he had to make this like very mature decision to not be together and have Wax actually choose the relationship that was more beneficial for him politically, better benefit for him politically versus what his heart actually wanted. And then for that to actually work out in such a brilliant way, because like at the end of Shadows itself is essentially when Steris like completely won me over, when she just didn't say anything to Wax and just completely allowed him to grieve and just completely weep in her arms and just was there for him. Like that right there, that alone, like she's the best character in all the books in my opinion, because like that is such a beautifully human empathetic thing to do, and it's so rare that like people have enough emotional like understanding to do something like that, especially in books. So it's really, really cool that that happened, and I really love the character. But it kind of sucks that like in bands and then Alloy, I mean she's in bands quite a lot. That's the most of where we get to see a lot of Stairs, and we get to see a lot of like her actual awesomeness like really take shape and stuff. We get to see how cool she is. So that really works out. But like the way she's kind of sidelined and why do I struggle with the name of the fourth book? Well, the way she kind of gets sidelined in the Lost Metal kind of sucks. Granted, what she's doing in the city is important and it is like character focus and stuff, and it's really cool, but we don't get a lot of POVs from that activity and stuff. So it's it's not that great. And also the stuff that she comes up with, the really cool plans she come up with to try to help mitigate the potential disasters of the explosion and stuff, like it's just kind of a function of the way the story works out that we don't really get to see that stuff play out. because Wax and Wayne were able to basically, well, Wayne more than anybody was able to slow down the explosion and compress it to a point where it didn't cause, gigantic tsunamis or anything like that. So a lot of her disaster preparedness plans weren't that necessary, which is a good thing. Ultimately, it's a good thing. But, again, we didn't get to see the fruits of her labor that much. So she feels kind of, pushed off to the side in a lot of ways, which is slightly disappointing. But she's still a very, very fun character. And the way in which Lost Metal kind of ends when we get essentially just pure setup for Era 3. Like, that's what it feels like a lot of the Maoish stuff was. It feels like Brandon knew he kind of needed to set up the Southern Continent people and stuff to get into Era 3 or what was going to be Era 2 stuff. But he basically had to flesh it all out here, which I think makes sense because imagine going into an era where there's the entire southern continent completely established and there's an establishment of like political controversy and stuff going on between the two continents and stuff, and we just have never been introduced to these people at all. Like, it would be kind of jarring. So I appreciate this middle era to kind of establish who they are, but the way in which they're used in this era is kind of disappointing because they very much are an afterthought. I like Alec as a character, mostly because he's the only one that gets any characterization, but we don't really get any characterization of any of the other, almost called them Moash, the other Maoish people, and that's just kind of a little lame. It's a little disappointing. I wish we got more of it. I mean, we got some characterization of some of the people, just a little bit, but like, again, it's just not nearly enough. But I imagine that'll be all kinds of Era 3 stuff. So I think the second era of Mistborn probably will work best as a trilogy, because I think Shadows of Self and Shadows of Self and Alloy of Law should really be one book. There's a lot of things in Bands of Mourning and Lost Metal that I would combine for simplicity, but I don't think the plots themselves are combinable in that kind of way, so I think they do both work as their own single books. So I think ultimately Era 2 should probably have been a trilogy, just have like one thick first book and then the other two smaller books or something, I don't know. But overall, reading my reread this time on Era 2, trying to approach the story on its own terms and its own merits without putting my own, assumptions and, all that kind of stuff on the story, and just like reading it for what it is, like really allowed me to enjoy it a lot more this time than I did on my initial few reads through. So I really enjoyed it. And of course, all the opening up of the Cosmere stuff that Brandon does in Lost Metal is a lot of fun. Granted, I would have loved to see more of Shy and the idea that she's now an Elantrian and out in the wind or whatever. It's fascinating, but like, if we don't get to deal with that on screen, I'll be disappointed. Because if we don't get to see like maybe a secret history or a little novella or something, Marcy helping the Ghost Bloods to go and find Shy and like get her to not use the Elantrian stamp anymore. Like, if we don't get to see that adventure, I'll be disappointed, because it's like, why do that if we don't get to see how it concludes, So I wouldn't appreciate that much. But overall, I think Era 2 is an interesting little piece of the Cosmere. I dig it when I read it on its own terms, but I still have issues with it. It's not a perfect work. It's not on the level of Era 1. It's not like, to me, it's probably the overall of all four books, the total quality is probably the same as Elantris. And Elantris is probably, it's early Brandon, so it's not as good as his early stuff. But I feel like Era 2 is probably that level of quality. That's kind of where I'm sitting with it. But again, my aesthetic like preferences, I don't really care for the Western aesthetic, so that's probably affecting my opinion on it and stuff. And the steampunk nature of it, like, we don't really dig into that a whole lot. So, like, it's kind of a underutilized part of the entire setup. So, it is what it is. But overall, I did enjoy Era 2, and I think, pretty much Brandon's standard is different than other standards. So, even if I say it's not a great series by Brandon's standard, it's still technically a better series than a lot of other series in general, because his stuff is just so much more, of high quality than just a lot of people. So, yeah. All right, with that being said, let's go ahead and wrap up this ramble session. Let me know in the comments down below. What are your thoughts on Mistborn Era 2? Did you find it to be kind of a mixed bag? Did you end up enjoying it more on a reread? Let me know about that in the comments down below. And as always, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And if you're interested in supporting the channel in another way, you can check out the Patreon. The link is in the description. So, with that being said, I'll talk to y'all next time. Peace.